I want to just highlight where tech is today and what the landscape looks like. The second thing is I actually want to give you guys a game plan of how to take advantage of these trends to actually improve your bottom line. And then the third is I'm going to go into forecasting kind of where the industry is going, talk about some cool tech trends that I'm really excited about that I think you guys will find super interesting. So if I do a good job, you guys will leave here with an actual action plan for the tech landscape and come back with strategies that you can implement in your business. So just a quick background about myself. I'm a partner in a firm called Verma Media. What we specialize in is actually helping companies use technologies that we feel are disruptive and then help them market those technologies. So a couple of sectors that we've been heavily involved in: AI, blockchain, VR, and the cybersecurity space. And so actually I had the honor of starting our food division 2 years ago, and it branched from a personal story of mine. So 2 years ago, a very close friend of mine calls me and he says, "AJ, I'm thinking about getting married, but I have a huge problem." And I go, "What's going on? What's the issue?" And he goes, "I'm marrying an Indian woman and I love beef." And so some of you might not know why this is an issue, but I'm Indian, so let me tell you. Being Indian and eating beef don't go together. It's the cow is sacred, you just don't do it. And so we're talking back and forth, and what he decides to do is go on this multi-month mission to cut beef out of his life. And so a couple months go by, and we catch up, and I talk to him about his results, and they're amazing. First off, there's so many amazing technological innovations that have come for alternative food and protein sources. That's helped him a bunch. But that could be as expected. What was more interesting is that he told me he had an entire community of people that were in the exact same shoes. There were meetup groups, circled 10x in terms of the amount of friends that he had, and there's huge forums of people, I'm not kidding you, brought together who were marrying somebody who's Indian when they love beef. And so I asked him, I'm like, what does this community look like? What are some of the questions that are asked? Questions like, how do I pick between beef and love? Best places to hide beef in your house. And my personal favorite, help, I smell like beef and it's ruining my relationship with my Indian wife. And so I see this, and for me, I look at this and I say, wow, this is amazing. If one technological innovation in a food group can cause this, how many more communities exist? And so I spent the next 2 years basically researching things like this, trends that were really interesting. What I found is that there are actually communities of people who love chicken nuggets but don't want to eat meat, and there's products trying to solve that. You have the same thing that's going on with pork. You have the same thing that's going on with fish. You even have a community of people that don't want to eat food at all. So Soylent is a company where essentially they're a meal replacement product. But instead of your traditional meal replacement, so say you take breakfast, lunch, or dinner, they want you to have this product and this product alone. 3-5 meals a day, 365 days a year. And so this is a business that still exists today. Some people might say it's pretty successful. And the kind of people that they're targeting are people who are super busy, who don't really care about the taste of food, but they really want people to know they're hardworking, so they don't have time to cook their own meals. What's more interesting is that this community has taken a life of its own. So there are people that are testing different formulas. They're actually putting up quotes in forums with questions like how to go out to dinner and bring out your Soylent mug and drink it, and they walk you through that. In fact, there's been several occasions where I've actually been at a coffee shop, somebody's drinking from a Soylent branded mug, and somebody from across the room will come over and say, "Hey, I'm a Soylent user too," and they become friends. And when you look at that, what's so interesting is how many of these communities have actually been made and created. And so for me, I decided I wanted to build out a division within our agency just to go after this, because it's just super interesting and really changes the marketing landscape completely. And so of all the industries that I've been able to be a part of and a lot of the technologies that I've had to work with, I can say without a doubt, from the past 2 years, no industry, AI, blockchain, VR, nothing has actually compared to the amount of innovation from the technology end that we're seeing in the food space. And so I've had the pleasure of writing a lot about these trends in Forbes and a couple other outlets. And what's interesting is as I was gathering data and company examples, I could really only pull a majority of these from the last 12 months. The reason is I would go back 2 to 3 years, and a lot of those companies have already been out innovated. And so it just kind of shows you how fast and how competitive this market is getting. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. So one of the things I was talking about before is technology and how technology has made all of these different food groups. And I think the biggest effect that we've seen in terms of companies and changing their growth plans is how that's actually affected their marketing strategy. And so to explain this in the easiest way possible, I'm going to take the example of milk. So here is milk in the 1940s. Here's a picture of a beautiful, normal-sized cow. You have a farmer, it's grass-fed, free-range. Like, this is how I want to imagine my milk is every day. You fast forward, and as you can kind of see with this picture, everything's becoming crowded. Everything's built for efficiency. We're basically trying to get as much milk out of these cows as possible. Spaces are smaller, cows are way bigger, and so everything is created around creating efficiency within this market. Now you fast forward into the last couple of years, and alternative milk sources have blown up. You look at almond milk growing at almost 15%. You look at coconut milk growing over 14%. You have oat milk, which I recently have become obsessed with, growing over 8%. And in total, in the last 5 years, non-dairy sales are up 61%. And so what does that show? What does that really say for us? What it really says is that the traditional way that you would market a product like milk, and those traditional kind of innovations in terms of what we thought were great marketing channels, no longer are relevant. So the old school way of how I would market a product like this is I would basically go create a product and launch it out to the masses on TV, on radio, whatever it is. And I would innovate my product to an extent. I would maybe aim at moms instead of kids, or I would have some creative branding, or maybe I compete on price. But essentially, as a whole, I was going after that mainstream consumer, and I could afford to do that because the communities outside of that, they just weren't big or relevant enough. In another way, the buying process was super linear. It didn't take a genius to figure this out. You come in, you talk about your product, you find out how you want to diversify it, and you just shoot it out to the masses. And so, let's say you don't drink dairy, that's okay, because I'm going to get enough customers through this that it's really not that big of a deal. So everything was kind of built on targeting the masses. You fast forward to today, and the entire buying process is perpetual and horizontal. To give you an example, the average amount of customer touch points today, with what used to be 1 or 2, is 7. Meaning, on average, you need to see my brand 7 times before you're making a purchase. That's completely changed how we have to market. So no longer is it one mainstream channel. We're talking about social media, we're talking about review sites, we're talking about friends, we're talking about influencer marketing, we're talking about our different communities. For instance, if I'm on the keto diet, I'm gonna go to somebody in the keto community and ask them what they think before I buy. And so the entire buying journey now has really been disrupted because of this. And so how are brands responding to this change? One of the early things that we're seeing, and I know we're talking about this in different ways, is optimizing for these marketplaces. Our firm is actually really bullish on marketplaces. We believe in their future, and what we like to point to is kind of the data of how they're growing. And so what we look at in terms of marketplaces and what's interesting to us is we see the value proposition of them as being able to control one of those customer touch points. So to give you an example, for those of you who don't know Instacart, essentially Instacart goes to a grocery store and brings me my groceries. So if I want a banana, I can order it on Instacart, they'll go to Safeway and they'll bring the banana to me. We think that because a lot of companies don't really understand how these platforms work and don't realize the amount of competition, there's low-hanging fruit that they miss with them. So to give you an example, with Instacart, if I actually use Instacart, I'm typing in what product I want. So if I'm representing a business, it's super important. Like, let's just take bananas, for instance. When I type in bananas at Instacart, I want my banana to show up first. And when somebody clicks on the picture, I want to make sure I have control over what that picture looks like. And when somebody clicks on the product information, I want to make sure that my banana is described exactly how I want it to be. And so a lot of companies don't realize that you have a lot of autonomy and you have a lot of say in what goes into that. DoorDash, another example in a different market. DoorDash restaurant delivery. If I want Taco Bell, the driver will go to Taco Bell and bring that Taco Bell to me. Again, what a lot of brands miss is the fact that DoorDash actually, many times, sends out an email to all their customers within a set area announcing new restaurants. So one of the things that we do is we take huge advantage of that. We're making sure everything in that email is written how we want it. Because it's for us, it's free marketing if we join their platform. The other side that we're seeing are things like companies actually optimizing for these third-party marketplaces. So we're noticing niche restaurants popping up where their actual physical location is completely built for integration for third-party marketplaces. And what that means is you would actually walk into this restaurant and you couldn't buy anything. the entire restaurant is known to integrate with this. So the reason that they do that is they want to reduce the amount of time it takes for a driver to come to the restaurant, pick up their food, and go. And so a huge amount of focus is put on branding of their packaging, as well as making sure that when a customer gets their food, it's easy to open and nothing's wrong with their order. And more of these restaurants are popping up. And then finally, Freshly is just an example of a company who creates food and brings it straight to your door. A lot of these companies are popping up too. One of the issues with them is just the operations and the organization it takes to do this. And so what we like to do is look at all these companies popping up and think about being a supplier for these companies, especially early on, getting into their operations and figuring out how, as you grow, can we keep that. And so here's 3 others, but like if you just look at the market in total, it's a $3 trillion market and growing. And I think like when we look at the case of these companies losing money, yes, a lot of these companies are losing money, but you know, in Silicon Valley, whether it's right or wrong, a lot of these companies have so much pressure to grow at whatever the cost is. They're losing money on deliveries, they're going to continue losing money on deliveries, but they also have hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. Now, is this going to change eventually? Yes, it is going to change eventually. But if I'm a brand, the way I'm looking at this is I don't want to compete with these companies. Most likely, unless I have a ton of money, I'm not going to build my own delivery system. Instead, I believe in diversification. Hop on as many of these as possible, that makes sense, without stretching yourself too thin, and see who wins, and basically ride the coattails of all these companies. If they're spending all this money on marketing, instead of fighting it, we actually believe we need to be bullish and take advantage of it. The second thing, which is probably the most unsexy part of my talk today, is going to be improving your customer brand online. So going back to the amount of customer touch points, review platforms are growing. I'm sure a lot of you know this, of users of Yelp and Google reviews and things like that. And so a lot of brands have really neglected this because it's not fun to do. Nobody wakes up and says, I want to go and respond to a bunch of angry customers every day and feel fulfilled, right? I mean, if you find them, please bring them to me. We'd love to have them. That'd be great. So essentially what we've kind of developed is we have a 3-step strategy that basically solves this. It's not a huge amount of work. It takes a couple hours a week. If you do it every week, a lot of these issues are solved. And they're fairly simple. The first step is actually just every week doing a Google search on your company and just looking at the first 2 pages. In fact, you know, over 90% of Google searches don't even go past the first page, but just to be extra careful, we say go past the first 2 pages. And then just mark anything negative about the company, so any listing. So if you have below 4 stars on a review site, even like if you have something like a Glassdoor and those are negative, just mark them. Then the second thing is deciding which reviews to respond to. So you have people and businesses on like completely ends of the spectrum. Some just completely ignore reviews. On the other side, people respond to every review, which actually can be a nightmare. I'll give you an example. Like if I just, if you own a restaurant and I come to your restaurant and then my review is, this restaurant sucks, to actually solve that problem on an online forum is going to take half a page. And so even if you do solve it, it sends off 2 bad messages. One, if you're thinking from the eyes of a customer, no customer wants to come and see one review that's a negative review as 50% of that review page. The second is it shows the customers they can leave a comment that they really didn't take too much time on or explain what was wrong and get a response from you. So that's just an example of what not to do. So, it takes some trial and error, but know which ones you should and you should respond to. And then the third thing is whenever you actually decide to respond to a review, treat it like you're doing a press release. I think a lot of businesses forget how powerful a solid response to a review is. Not only are you turning somebody into an evangelist, so if I have a bad experience at your Italian restaurant and I list why and you respond to me, for me that's gonna completely change my customer perception. But the other side is if I'm actually looking at your review page and I see that you're actually responding to those reviews and you're helping fix the problem, that could be the difference between me picking your restaurant, if you're at 3 stars, and going to another restaurant at 4 stars. So it's marketing collateral, and that's how you have to think about it. And then finally, after a couple of studies and doing this with a good amount of companies, unless your product, for lack of a better term, just like sucks and like people are constantly complaining about it, you should actually be optimizing and trying to get as many reviews as possible. what we've noticed is over time, the more reviews a company has, even if they're middle-of-the-road reviews, the better that it does. And so we've seen companies be aggressive about this in different ways. You know, an example is on the B2B side, when a customer leaves even a good email, asking them to post it on your site. We've noticed that conversion rates on sites go way up just having a quote from customers. Or simply asking, hey, would you mind leaving it on this platform? Those things can go a long way. And then again, the last thing I'll say about the review side is, the way that this gets bad is when companies become lazy about it and they just don't do it. And what happens is months or years go by, they look on Google, they see all these negative reviews, they don't know how to fix it, and then they become overwhelmed. And they say, you know, oh man, like I can't deal with this, whatever, I'll just leave it. The best way to go about it is just to chisel it week by week, continually work through it, and eventually it's gonna become a huge asset for you, and you'll notice your actual conversion rates for customers is gonna go up. And then the last thing is in increasing customer touch points through social media. So, you know, what used to happen when social media was on the rise is that you could just leave a general post or a few general posts on your platform, and that was enough. And what we've seen is that companies have gotten so innovative in how they're using social to increase customer touch points that unless you're using 3-4 different ways to use social, it's probably not going to work too well. So to give you an example of some of the main ones, paid social is actually using paid ads. We're seeing huge ROI right now still on Instagram, even though Instagram ads are getting more and more expensive. If you have a beautiful product, Instagram is outbeating every single other platform in the space. A lot of people were really bullish on Snapchat and things like that. We've really A/B tested it, and almost all of our brands are now on Instagram. Even as prices go up, we still think there's huge opportunities there. To get better at it, they're actually using a lot of retargeting. So they're installing things to get their customer data when a user actually goes to their site, and then they're targeting specific ads towards that demographic. So to give you an example, if I am a college student and I come to your site, the ad that you're going to show me is going to be extremely different than if I'm a working dad who's 50 years old, right? And so a lot of people are using retargeting in that way just to get better at their ad program. The third is affiliate marketing, so actually having people sell your product online for you and you pay them a commission. We're seeing a huge amount of growth in this space in terms of CBD and kind of more new and innovative products. And then fourth is influencer marketing. I'm sure a lot of us have seen some recent campaigns that have gone out, especially now with the NFL season starting. That's one sector that a lot of people are using. This has been super effective. Influencer marketing is one of those technologies that it can be really good or it can be really bad. So if you just look at kind of surface level information like number of followers and number of likes, a lot of times that's how brands get burned. There's a lot of platforms that will actually tell you conversion rate on demographic, etc. with influencer marketing. And then the other thing that we're seeing in general is that a lot of times we're getting a bigger ROI over with niche influencers than with mainstream influencers. So if I just have a general food blogger, I'm actually seeing less ROI than if I have somebody who's targeting like the paleo community or the vegan community. And so there's a lot of interesting insights that we're getting through there. So you really have to rely on a ton of data to do the influencer marketing right, but it is super effective. And then the last thing is just paid search, which is basically just paid ads through Google, right? And so companies now are using a lot of these different formulas in combination. And I think while before we saw companies move the needle, now we're just seeing insane results. In fact, you know, some of these results are kind of scary. I don't know if any of you have tried the Popeyes chicken sandwich. I still have not. It's one of my things I want to do before I die. But they're sold out everywhere. And like, there's actually a set of people that robbed Popeyes, like held them at gunpoint just to get a chicken sandwich. And so if that's not proof enough that this works, I don't know what it is. I hope you guys all have these results, maybe not to this point, but right to that cusp. And so these are how brands are getting creative, and these are the results that they're getting. Popeyes did some interesting things, right? They combined all those social platforms, but then they actually went after other companies' chicken sandwiches. They went after Chick-fil-A's famous chicken sandwich and Wendy's, and they used a combination of the formulas I did before. And so doing that properly and mastering it, you really create a movement, which we've seen to be very, very effective. And I think why this is so important, why I wanted to focus a lot on customer touch points, is that brand loyalty is decreasing. In fact, it's at an all-time low now. And when we asked and when we looked at research of why that is, there's 4 main things, but they all kind of go together. There's not too much differentiation. So lack of product information, vague food labels, and then on the bottom, not knowing what's important to the company, lack of company values. If you put those all together, it's just about trust, right? What customers are saying is that there's a lot less trust that they have in their brands. And so the big thing that Customer Touchpoints does is it solves that. And I think there's a giant push now for companies to say, how can we bring more transparency to our customers? And I think people have to understand the reason why we're seeing such a demand for transparency is it's never been easier for customers to find out everything about your company. I can find out exactly what people think about your company, how long you've been in business, who the people are in your company, where they graduated from, all your company values, and then I can go on social media and instantly find out how you portray yourself and what people think of you. And so the fact that we have all this information puts an increasing amount of pressure on brands to be more transparent as possible. And for customers, especially in the millennial and Gen Z generation, that transparency is not looked at as a plus anymore. It's looked at as needed, and it's actually required for a lot of buyers today. So one of the ways that customers are getting through this is smart label technology. Now, smart label technology is nothing incredibly new. It's been out for a while. Essentially, at the simplest way, what you're doing is you're solving that issue of not being able to put as much on your label by scanning a label and then it pulls up a bunch of information. This has been out for a while. It's interesting to look at, but what's more interesting is the amount of that companies are investing in this and really getting innovative with it. So here's just an example. This is smart label technology. You can see this is a way not to do it. It's at the bottom of the product, super hard to find. But then you look at Chips Ahoy, and they put it front and center, and so more people are clicking it. Now there's a lot of advantages to actually somebody clicking the label and getting their information, which I have a slide about later on. But again, one of the ways that brands are taking advantage of it is through actually adjusting their packaging. The other side is they're getting really creative in what they're giving you. So now brands are actually allowing you to get set recipes when you actually scan those barcodes to tell you different things that they can make. The other thing that they're doing is telling you when the product is actually about to expire and giving you better data. So after you buy my product a couple of times, I can tell you, hey, Joe, typically you buy our product every 4 weeks. It's been 6. Do you need a refill on your phone when you scan this? And so it basically is solving a lot of those issues for customers, making their lives easier. And I think as this technology has improved, more and more people are getting comfortable with scanning those barcodes. Now, to take it a step further, we're actually seeing huge innovation, especially for brands who don't have a ton of money to spend on developing their own super robust smart label technology, is seeing how third-party apps are actually using it. So one of the most famous ones, MyFitnessPal, if any of you have ever used it, essentially one of the features there is you can scan a product, and if it is integrated with MyFitnessPal, they'll put all the information into their app, and it'll actually affect and it'll count the number of calories, macronutrients for you. And so the value proposition to the customer is I can easily scan a label, and it's put into the product. This is super interesting to us because more and more people are using technology to increase the healthiness in their lives. There's actually a recent company, Noom, who raised $58 million, and their premise is lose a pound every week for 16 weeks. $58 million, and there's a bunch of other competitors that are coming up to the market. While that's so interesting to us, is that there's a huge opportunity to partner with a lot of these apps. A lot of them are startups, and so they're figuring out how best to integrate food labels into their product. And so what's interesting is if you can do that, there's a lot of different ways to take advantage of it. So let's say, I sell cupcakes. If somebody scans a more unhealthy cupcake, being able to say, hey, here's what you inserted, here's a healthier alternative, that's huge for me. That helps a ton. And so it's free marketing to kind of go through. And the other thing is it really solves the brand loyalty issue that we're continuously seeing. And I think that's probably one of the most exciting things that I like about this technology is that when technology changes people's lives and makes them healthier, there's loyalty there that will never go away. An example is somebody lost 100 pounds using Noom. I bet you this person's not ever going to delete this app. It's not going to happen. And so if I'm a brand that's been partnered with this company early on, I don't really need to worry too much. If they're using my product and they like it, I know that they're going to be on this app. I'm with that app early on, and once they find a formula that works for, let's say, losing weight in this case, they're not going anywhere. And so these are the opportunities that I think for fast-moving companies of where you can go and how you can easily take advantage of this technology and not spend a huge amount of marketing dollars. But in general, smart label technology is taking off. There's a bunch of huge companies that are investing in it. So while I think the actual science and what we're using smart label technology for is interesting and it's going to grow, I want to make sure that we all understand that there's huge opportunities of companies that have raised tons and tons of money that are utilizing this. And so keeping an eye on that landscape and partnering with them early on is a way that we can actually move extremely fast, more than some of the bigger companies that have millions upon millions of dollars to spend on this technology. And the final thing that I was talking about is that when you actually get data from this technology, it can start all of your marketing trends. So eventually when people become integrated through smart label technology, we can get customer information. We can find out their age, we can find out the demographic information, and that's going to set everything up for how we advertise to them. Again, going back to my previous example, the way you advertise to a college student who's in a fraternity is extremely different to how you advertise to a mother of four. And so this technology can provide information. The better information that we have, the more direct marketing that we can do. The more direct marketing that we do, the more money that we can save and the higher the conversion rate. And so technology works both ways. Yes, we're providing a lot of information to the customer, but we're also getting a lot of information from the customer. And that's really powerful. And so just to wrap up, I didn't want to keep this going for too long. In closing up, why do we need to invest in tech? I think there's a lot of theories and a lot of things that people kind of say when they talk about this. They say that there's a lot of technology innovations and that's why we need to innovate to keep up. For us, it's kind of very simple when you look at the numbers. The population is going to reach 9.7 billion by 2050. And so just for our species alone, we have to increase food production by 70%. So not only is there a lot of pressure as a species for us in terms of increasing production, increasing efficiency, but every nation and every kind of community is in a different life cycle of where they are with food, which is really interesting. In some countries, just getting food and enough food is the primary concern. But then you have other societies within the United States where we've learned to be more creative about food. We have tons of different diets. Keto, paleo, we have people who are on a bulletproof diet that blend butter in their coffee. You have people who are now doing intermittent fasting and not eating for huge portions of the day. And all of these communities that are being developed, we're getting more creative and evolving. And so as this kind of expands, more and more innovation is needed. And as innovative as I said that we've been in the past couple of years, we actually have to be even more innovative just to keep going. And so, out of all the industries that are there, I don't think any other industry has as much pressure as food to keep this innovation actually to keep going. So in closing, there's a couple of cool trends that I'm just excited about that I didn't want to go into too much in the presentation, but just thought I would share with you guys. The first one is lab-grown fish. And so a lot of people are looking at fish alternatives, and I don't know if anybody's kind of followed the amount of fish that we're getting that's farm-raised now as opposed to wild-caught. And so companies are experimenting with lab-grown fish. Apparently it tastes delicious. And then you have companies like Tyson investing in actually substitutes for shrimp, which is pretty interesting. And so the whole fish space to me is alternative proteins, and the amount of money going into that space is really interesting. The second one is actually using 3D printers to make food. There's a lot of companies that are doing this in different ways. Probably one of the coolest is a company that's using a 3D printer to make a steak. And early tests of this company is that they can make a steak juicier and cooked the exact way that you want it, better than any other cooking method. And so, the story of my friend, I'm sure he's really pumped about this one. But pretty interesting. And then just the last one, and again, this is a talk for another time, but one of the fears in technology right now is AI. And